My name is Leo Galante. You're gonna help us out, kid. In return, you'll be under my protection. And who knows, maybe you'll even learn a thing or two along the way.
I guess I can't say no to that offer, huh?
I don't remember asking.
Leo Galante. When Vito Scaletta first received instructions from his best friend Joe Barbaro to get in contact with Leo Galante inside Hartman Federal Penitentiary, Vito had no idea who he was attempting to seek out protection from during his 10-year prison sentence. All he knew was that, behind bars, he wasn't going to last on his own, and Galante was his only hope of surviving. Vito was under the impression he would just have to ask around, find the man he was looking for, and the significance of Luca Guarino and Alberto Clemente's name would guarantee an easier bid. Once his stint was up, then he can go back right where he started, offering to put in the work for the Clemente family, eventually raising the $5,000 asking price to be initiated into the family. Vito believed he was on the cusp of entering a world that he thought he had all figured out when Leo Galante entered the picture. From the start, it was evident Leo wasn't just some old man with powerful connections. Leo himself wielded immense power, especially inside of the prison. He was able to acquire a private audience with Vito while he was held in isolation. He was able to pull Vito from work detail for personal interests without any questions being asked, and he would eventually have Vito even moved directly into his own cell, which was a private suite filled with all sorts of creature comforts normally stripped away from prisoners. He had commodities such as his own kitchen, cooking supplies, a couch, a table. Such were the blessings of a consigliere behind bars. Now, for those that have already played Mafia 2, you know how important of a character Leo Galante is to Vito. Outside of prison, he continued to pull more strings for the young man. He cut off nearly 4 years of Vito's 10-year prison sentence. He orchestrated Vito getting inducted into the Falcone crime family at the same time Joe was being sworn in. A move that he openly admitted having some reservations about, preferring Vito to work with himself and the Vinci crime family, whom he was a consigliere of. But he saw how close Vito and Joe were, and he didn't want to split the pair up. Vito and Leo developed a close relationship that began with Leo taking a mentor role that slowly became a genuine friendship, with what I would say Vito even finding a bit of a father figure in the old man. Considering Vito never had anything respectable or affectionate to say about his father, who left his family in debt, Leo, by contrast, actively looking out for the young man and bringing him up to speed on the rules of the life that he wanted to get into. While it may not have been a straight and narrow path, it was still much more guidance and mutual respect than Vito ever had before. While there could possibly be a whole video dedicated to their relationship, this video is centered squarely on Leo Galante, Frank Vinci's right-hand man. What we know on the origins of their organization, how Leo found himself in prison, and covering the wake of Mafia 2, discussing how Galante was able to transition his power into becoming an influential figure within the commission. Hailed as the most successful crime family in the history of Empire Bay, their legacy is a monument to the calculated brilliance of Leo Galante and the quiet but unrelenting power of Frank Vinci. The pair arrived in Empire Bay in 1908. No different than most, they were immigrants with a vision far grander than the modest opportunities offered to most. What set them apart, though, was they didn't just seek to survive in the new world or get comfortable in the rat-infested shacks most of these immigrants found themselves adjusting to, but instead, the pair aimed to rule it. Frank Vinci, upon his arrival, wasted no time embedding himself within the Italian immigrant community. With a sharp eye for opportunity and his steely resolve, he established a web of extortion and smuggling rackets that quickly became the foundation of their growing operation. Leo Galante, on the other hand, worked diligently behind the scenes, constantly devising strategies to expand and perfect their endeavors. Every move was methodical, every decision was deliberate. It was a masterclass in ambition and control. Originally starting off with a more strong-armed approach, as time went on, their power grew. Their vision went beyond the borders of their own community, and with it came adjustments in planning and execution. By the early 1920s, little more than a decade after their arrival, the duo made their first significant play, probably their most significant play, and that was seizing control of the Southport docks. This strategic acquisition was more than just a business coup. It was a declaration of power. The docks became the nerve center of their operations, transforming smuggling into a seamless enterprise, and their timing couldn't have been any better. As they gained control of this vital artery into the city, the United States was plunged into the Prohibition era. Their control of the region's most vital trade routes became the cornerstone of their ascension. Liquor flowed as freely as money into their coffers, catapulting the Vinci name into infamy. Despite the growing scale of his empire, Frank Vinci chose a path of discretion. The era of bare-knuckle brawls and smashed storefronts was a distant memory. Frank Vinci understood that power, like respect, could no longer be earned through brute force alone. The age of the fair and respectable Don had now arrived, and he embraced it fully, adapting to the times with quiet cunning and an unparalleled foresight. His low profile wasn't a retreat from influence, but a masterpiece of subtlety. While others sought out the limelight, Frank operated in the shadows, weaving alliances that fortified the Vinci family's empire. Politicians, law enforcement, and power brokers became silent partners in his rise. These relationships didn't just protect the family, they elevated it, placing them above reproach and beyond the reach of rivals. But as are the rules of this life, no matter how powerful or untouchable you may seem, there's always competition. For Frank Vinci, that competition came in the form of the Moretti crime family. Established by Tommaso Moretti in 1913, the Morettis quickly made a name for themselves in Empire Bay, building their wealth on the smuggling and distribution of alcohol during Prohibition. For years, the two families coexisted with a tense but workable peace, each carving out their own piece of the underworld. Frank's vision and Leo's careful guidance allowed them to not rely so heavily on the singular income, no matter how massive it was at the time. With an early head start in rebuilding and expansion, Leo Galante's sharp instincts gravitated towards sports and horse racing. As the Prohibition neared its end, the visionary Consigliere foresaw the rise of a new empire within an empire. They began laying the groundwork for rackets so lucrative they would one day overshadow even the heights of their Prohibition-era success. But Leo's ambitions were still in their infancy, a vision not yet fully realized. Those plans wouldn't come to fruition until the mid to late 1930s, after an unavoidable storm came to pass, and that was the looming conflict with the Moretti family, who, in contrast to the Vinci crime family, Moretti's fortunes were tied too tightly to Prohibition. When illegal alcohol sales began to plummet in the early 1930s, the Moretti family's revenue dried up almost overnight. Desperation set in, and Tommaso's organization turned its sights toward the Vinci family's more stable and lucrative ventures. The inevitable clash, fueled by Vinci's unrelenting quest for supremacy and Moretti's desperate fight for survival, became one of the most brutal chapters in Empire Bay's history. For 2 grueling years, the Vinci-Moretti War raged on, leaving both families battered. Manpower was lost, resources depleted, finances strained, and prestige tarnished. But it wasn't just the violence that defined this conflict. It was a war tainted by a conclusion steeped in betrayal and envy, a battle of ambition and desperation that left scars far beyond this conflict's conclusion. And yet, here we are, recounting the rise of the Vinci family Mafia 2, celebrating its legendary Don and his enduring legacy. The Moretti family and its underdog story has all but faded into obscurity. Why? That answer lies in a plan, a masterstroke of cunning hatched by none other than Leo Galante. Now, the details of how it all came together remain lost to time, known only to those directly involved. Who made the first move or how trust was forged between enemies is a secret buried with the men who played their parts. What is known, however, is that Leo Galante struck some sort of alliance with a Moretti capo, an ambitious and discontented figure who saw opportunity in betrayal. Together they plotted the assassination of Don Tommaso Moretti. The plan to do so was as ruthless as it was effective. A bomb was placed beneath Tommaso's vehicle, ensuring his death in a spectacular and public fashion. Officially, the assailants were never named, and no arrests were made, but behind closed doors, the truth was undeniable. Carlo Falcone, a Moretti capo, had conspired with Leo Galante to end his boss's reign, and his reward for his betrayal? The remnants of Moretti's empire, headless and weakened, but still somewhat intact enough for him to claim. Falcone emerged as the head of his own family. His rapid rise was no coincidence. With Moretti dead and the war abruptly ended, the Vinci family, however, emerged as the unchallenged rulers. Their dominance was now absolute, the rivals reduced to a mere footnote in the city's history. And Falcone, while he just established his smaller, weaker family, personally was still obliged by a favor to Leo Galante. In the aftermath of the Vinci-Moretti War, as the families worked to recover from its losses, Leo Galante once again set his sights on expansion. Now, Leo's passion had always been rooted in sports, particularly boxing and horse racing. These were two arenas where competition, strategy, and a risk intersected perfectly with the man's ambitions. Leo's own story even began in the ring. He was a former bare-knuckle fighter that eventually turned prize fighter. He built a reputation not just with his fists, but as he got older, working alongside Frank Vinci, his reputation evolved to develop an image sharp of body and sharp of mind for opportunity. The raw instinct that carried him to achieve victory in the ring and oversee the successful years of the Vinci crime family would continue to thrive inside him, helping him rise to oversee Empire Bay's largest bookmaking operation, running it successfully for over 2 decades. But even the sharpest players can get caught in the game. And in 1943, Leo was arrested for bookmaking and fixing fights. He was sentenced to 5 years in Hartman Federal Penitentiary. It seemed like the end of the road, and for most this would have been the sign to slow down or relent to some degree. Some people might have just rolled over and gave up, but for Leo Galante, prison was just another stage, another opportunity to adapt, survive, and thrive. Thanks to his status and deep connections, Leo's life behind bars, as I said at the beginning of the video, was far from ordinary. His cell was a private suite, complete with cooking facilities and every amenity a man of his stature could ever desire. He didn't just command respect, he commanded the prison itself practically, able to instruct guards to run errands and carrying out his bidding. Even in confinement, Leo's eye for business and power was unstoppable. Within the walls of Hartman, he orchestrated an underground fighting ring that wasn't just a way to pass the time, but became the place where grudges were settled, alliances were forged, and fortunes were made. The inception and perfect execution of such an event to settle broader, more diplomatic issues that expanded into racial and gang affiliations could be seen as another talent the man had, an ability to broker peace or navigate difficult situations diplomatically, something he would later successfully pull off for Vito Scaletta in the wake of both Don Vinci and the Chinese triads wanting him dead for accidentally protecting a police informant and initiating a war in the process. But I'm getting slightly ahead of myself. Through this fighting ring, Leo would not forget those most valuable and loyal to him. Apart from Vito, there was another man Leo rewarded handsomely once he was out of prison, and that man was Pepe Costa. Pepe was initially Frank Vinci's bodyguard, but inside the prison, he became Leo's most prized fighter and elevated to the position of Leo's personal bodyguard. Once he was freed from prison, Leo continued to take care of him, appearing to give Pepe a permanent position as his personal bodyguard and chauffeur, strengthening that bond from the early days of Hartman. From Hartman Federal Penitentiary to freedom, Leo remained a steady presence, embodying the principles of loyalty, respect, and tradition that defined the Vinci family and the old guard of Empire Bay. True to his word, Leo Galante honored his promises and rewarded loyalty, seamlessly returning to his role as Consigliere to Frank Vinci. For a few months, it seemed like business as usual, until the inevitable happened. Leo, a prominent and powerful figure in the oldest and most respected crime family, became the target of a hit, a plan that might have succeeded if not for Vito's timely discovery and intervention. Vito's warning came just in time, allowing the seasoned consigliere to act. Employing his years of experience in such a dangerous business, Leo brokered a deal with the would-be assassin, sparing his life but forcing him into exile. He would quietly disappear to the city of Lost Heaven, with vague plans to head further south. Now beyond that, his whereabouts and activities during his exile remain a mystery, left to speculation and rumor. But what mattered most wasn't where Leo went, but what he remembered. Vito's act of courage, or stupidity. Saving the old man despite the risk to himself left a lasting impression. It was a decision that, although complicated the fragile balance between the Vinci and Falcone crime families, it forged a stronger bond between Leo and Vito. For Leo, it was a debt of gratitude he would not forget and would actually come to return the favor much later, sparing Vito's life by getting Frank Vinci and the Chinese triads to pardon Vito as long as he killed Don Falcone for them and subjected himself to his own permanent exile from the city of Empire Bay down to the southern United States in the city of New Bordeaux. While exiled, something that's often overlooked is that Vito actually continued to correspond with Leo from down in New Bordeaux. There's a handful of coded messages written on the back of postcards that he sent to his friend that saved his life, keeping him up to date on everything going on in his life. Considering Vito was under Sal Marcano, a man who hated him as much as he hated working for him, it can also speak volumes for just how lonely and isolated the made man really was, which was also a situation Leo settled between the Commission and Sal Marcano, establishing a deal where if Marcano agreed to accept Vito, along with anyone else they threw his way, in return the Commission would be lenient on Sal and how he ran New Bordeaux, allowing him to effectively do whatever he saw fit, requiring that he only provide a generous 20% kickback of all of his proceeds, long loosening the initial strict rules against drugs that was held so passionately by Frank Vinci that he was ready to go to war with Carlo Falcone over it. This brings us to how Leo Galante even found himself in such a powerful position as speaking on behalf of the entire commission. Truth be told, there's nothing setting the how or why in stone, meaning there's a little bit of speculation and piecing together here. To my understanding, the original writers behind Mafia 2 were not the same writers behind Mafia 3's story, which leads to this becoming a question answered by just chalking it up to fan service. However, considering Galante is an experienced old man that has been in the business for over 40 years by the time Mafia 3's story rolls around and has proven more than capable at handling massive, complicated, extremely delicate situations, such as war with factions even outside of the Commission. I mean, Vinci was losing men to the Chinese triads who believed they were attacked by Vinci initially when it was just the doing of two men, Joe and Vito. Speaking of Joe, if Leo was able to spare Vito, why would he not be able to do the same for Joe? It's all but officially confirmed in writing that Leo's chauffeur at the end of Mafia 3 is Joe Barbaro. He was a made man similar to Vito, and if Vito was spared, why wouldn't Joe be? Leo's history has also shown him to be a visionary and quite good at reading people and opportunities. Joe wanted this type of life more than Vito did. He was even offered the position as a capo for Falcone if he offed his friend. A man who wants this life, is passionate and capable, but a liability with his best friend would cause problems. Vito showed he can cause a mess for a friend. His loyalty to Leo, saving him from his hit, was the prime example of that. So the trouble he was in at the end of Mafia 2 would grant the opportunity for Leo to repay the favor while getting Vito to believe Joe was killed. A cunning way to repurpose a useful man while silently repaying his friend, who really always looked towards him for how the rules of this life worked. Leo has always been cunning, diplomatic, highly intelligent, and extremely efficient. It would make sense for him to be appointed as the head of the commission.